The core issue with the president's first term was that there were not nearly enough people that existed in the ecosystem here in Washington, D.C. that were both competent and also aligned with the president, his agenda, what he originally ran on in 2015. And our sort of thesis here was that, okay, there are not a lot of these people in DC, right, that are both competent and aligned with the president's agenda. And so we said they got to be out there somewhere. And all that they're waiting for is someone to find them.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sit Down, but before we get to the interview, we'd love it if you'd hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review because we love your feedback. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works and how to affect real change. Without further ado, here's the interview. Nick Solheim, welcome to the Signal Sit Down.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Heading into this administration, there's one problem that everybody in Washington, D.C., at least the friends worth having, the ultra dark MAGA conservatives, they were concerned about one thing. There was one big issue heading into this administration. What was that issue?
It was personnel. Personnel is policy. I run this organization, called American Moment. We've been working on this since, started working on it in 2020. Publicly launched in 2021. And basically our whole central thesis is that the core issue with the president's first term was that there were not nearly enough people that existed in the ecosystem here in Washington, D.C. that were both competent and also aligned with the president, his agenda, what he originally ran on in 2015. And I think 15 is an important. People correct me on this all the time. They say, well, you mean 2016? That's when the election was. And people forget that a lot of the hardest content, as it were, came from 15. Like the first public conversations that we were having about mass deportations, some of these first debates where, he was tearing the neocons a new one publicly in front of the American people. And then, really some of the first serious conversations that we had about trade manufacturing in the United States that we had probably since Buchanan. And so
Muslim ban, et cetera.
Yeah. But I mean, even on the trade issue, right? Like that was also something, that Buchanan cared a lot about. And so, our sort of thesis here was that, okay, there are not a lot of these people in DC, right, that are both competent and aligned with the president's agenda. And so we said they got to be out there somewhere. And all that they're waiting for is someone to find them. And so we basically spent all of 2020 building the plan for what would become American Moment. And then when we launched in February of 2021, we launched with one main program aside from our podcast, Moment of Truth. We launched with the Fellowship for American Statecraft. And what the plan is for the Fellowship for American Statecraft is there are a bunch of under-credentialed people out there that are highly undervalued. Like, have you ever seen the movie Moneyball? Mm-hmm. Just like that. Like, we are looking for guys who get on base. That's sort of the central tenet that we're looking for. So we bring these young people to DC, and we initially started off, paying them $3,000 a month. They would come to DC for 12 weeks over the summer. We'd place them in an internship 4 days a week, and then they'd spend all day on Friday with us learning from a lot of the experts who had served in the first term. There are so many of these fellowships that exist on, ideology and philosophy and those.
Let me tell you about little platoons.
Yeah, not to say that those things are not important, but we're pre-selecting for the ideology already. So what these guys are getting on Fridays is praxis. How do we actually do all this? Yes, we all agree that mass deportations must happen. Here's how. Here's the legal mechanism. Here's how practically it works on the ground. et cetera. So, and the goal of that program was by the end of the 12 weeks, we would be able to get people into their first time job. So we provide them with this sort of credential of having gone through this fellowship. And early on, nobody knew who we were. So that credential didn't mean much, but they had done something here in DC and had a way to get their foot in the door. So that was sort of the initial launch point, and every single success we've had since then has, blossomed out of that. And so if there were like a simple takeaway, from this about what American Moment actually does, is that we, identify, educate, and credential the next generation of junior staff. That is, legislative correspondents, staff assistants on the Hill, special and confidential assistants in the administration. Creating those is what we exist to do.
Okay, so you mentioned the personnel problem off the top. And with your efforts to train the next generation of junior staffers, and hopefully they will be compensated and encouraged enough in this movement to continue moving up the ranks throughout their careers. But you suggest, from your business model, is that the personnel problem in the first administration was twofold. We focused so much on the top end of the personnel problem, the John Boltons in the room.
Yeah.
Right. We focus on failed cabinet secretaries and leakers at high levels or not so high levels in the example of Miles Taylor. But we talk
That was
about
the example I was going to bring up.
Yes, we talk about the high-level staffers, but we don't talk about the junior staffers enough. What is there a difference between the non-alignment with the upper echelons of the first Trump administration and the lower echelons of the first Trump administration?
Well, so I think on the Miles Taylor point, actually, I think this is very interesting to note. Despite his insistence to the contrary, not a senior staffer. Like at best, like mid-level, not an extremely senior person by any means. But sort of the way that I think about this, as it relates to the administration, though this is also very prevalent on the Hill as well, is junior staff do everything. They do everything from, being the principal's gatekeeper, right? So who's allowed in the door, to scheduling meetings, to doing, briefings for those meetings, to, a lot of them, especially early on when we don't have as many people, through the process yet in the administration, they end up doing a lot of the policy work. Too. I had a very smart friend at the Department of Defense one time tell me that the easiest way to learn the way that the Pentagon works is to be a special assistant first, because you touch a little bit of everything. And the principals, the more senior level folks, like we're talking about, assistant secretaries, undersecretaries, et cetera, they don't necessarily get final say on who serves under them, but they get a lot of input. And so the way that I sort of, think about this from term one is if there was somebody, bad in this assistant secretary slot or whatever, it's pretty safe to assume that a lot of the people under them were also bad. And I know for a fact from many conversations that the special assistants were actually where a lot of the leaking was coming from outside of the White House in the first term, particularly at DHS and some of the other high-level departments as well. My central thesis on this is that it is very important to have senior level people that are aligned with you, but you are not going to win on 100% of what you care about if the junior staff aren't with you as well.
Mm-hmm. We were in conversation earlier this week at the National Conservatism Conference, and you said this one thing is the most powerful piece in politics. It was the fact sheet. And I thought that was such a good way of summarizing not only how government works in praxis, but also just the way that information is still transmitted throughout government. I know that there's this massive modernization effort being undertaken by DOGE and others. But it is still the fact sheet that dominates, because you're dealing with high-level principles with so much responsibility, so much travel, and the fact sheet matters.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that's a dynamic that's super prevalent on the Hill as well. I hate to burst anyone's bubble, but 99% members of the House, the Senate, do not read those bills. Right?
Some are courageous enough to tell you openly
yes.
that we're not able to read
And there
of this.
are actually a select few that I'm not going to name check anybody in this, but there are a select few that I know personally who are actually very adamant about doing this, about going through the bill with staff and that sort of thing, which I think is great and is actually probably like your responsibility, you know, if you're like elected to represent the people from your district or from your state. But really the sort of analysis of whether a bill or an amendment or whatever is good, bad, how you should vote on it, how people in your district feel about it, all of that is coming up to you through staff. Like, by and large, the member is not, you know, doing all that legwork, research, you know, going back to the district and like, I'm doing a really serious listening session on this issue. You know, like that sort of thing is not really happening on the ground by and large. Like 90% of that information that you need to know about the bill or the amendment or whatever, and what you should do about it comes from the people that work for you. Mm-hmm. And so if the people that work for you are bad and they're not aligned with your worldview, or, you know, in the administration's case, the president's worldview or the secretary's worldview or whatever, all the way down to like the deputy assistant secretary's worldview, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, you're going to have a bad time. And it's one of the things that, you know, yet another thing that West Wing, the show, ruined about
I never
American
saw it.
Politics.
Never watched West Wing.
Never watched West Wing?
And I am
as a badge of honor.
I am going to maintain that.
Good show. Good show, not going to lie. Good show. But it's like you walk, you know, you see the scenes of these Senate or House committee rooms, and they're so beautiful. And it's like you actually go to Capitol Hill, and like some of them are pretty, but most of them are pretty bland. You see the staffers from Capitol Hill coming to the White House, interacting with White House staffers, etc. It's completely distorted the reality in Washington, D.C., where all of these characters on West Wing and other shows like it are 30s, 40s. You know, not only did they graduate from Yale, but then they went and got their MBA. And on top of that, they're a lawyer, actually, too. Yeah. And they're supposed to be, you know, 32, 33, 34. Well, in reality, they would just be getting out of school and doing this job. It's a complete fantasy, right? Like, even if you just ran the numbers on how many degrees that they have, you'd realize this is all totally fake. In reality, it's a bunch of 26-year-olds running your country. Yeah. And
doesn't it rock? Isn't it beautiful?
It's beautiful, but like it's beautiful within the context of the conservative movement, where I share the political ideas, the political persuasions of the people in my generation, right? Like, and frankly, I don't trust boomers as far as I can throw them.
Yeah.
I think
which is not very far.
Yeah. The proof is in the pudding, though, with what they've done to this country, and so I have zero trust for them whatsoever. Yeah. There is a part of me, though, that is scared of a country of the greatest republic of all time run by 26-year-olds.
But it's always been like that, though. Yeah. It's like you know, go back to all the signers of the Declaration of Independence, right? Like, by and large, a lot of them were in their 20s, which was different because when you were in your 30s, you were like old, you know, and about to die. But like, men do have this capability, you know, to be high-level operators and decision makers from a young age. Like, that is I actually think it's probably bad that you know, we look down upon that now.
But it does come as a shock whenever you bring it up to somebody back at home and say, like, hey,
totally.
Did you know that your country is run by a bunch of 26-year-olds? They go, what do you mean? I thought it was Sam Seaborn, played by Rob Lowe in The West Wing. You know, he's in his mid-30s. He's a speechwriter for the president, and he's, you know, uber credentialed elite mind. No, that's a fantasy.
Yeah.
Dispatch with that. It's 26-year-olds running your country. How do you feel about that? And their first reaction is, the one that I sympathize with sometimes, which is a little bit of nervousness and skepticism.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think that's completely unfounded. You're right. It has always been like that to a certain extent. The problem in the modern era of politics is all of this has kind of been longhouse and bureaucratized and feminized to where these young men who do have this capability are stripped of that capability, whether that's through the education system or the jobs that they actually end up in, right? And it turns into, somewhere state girl who grew up conservative and got a communications degree, running around talking to her boss about how the right in America just really isn't pro-woman enough.
Yeah.
That's the concern, is that the quality, the structure of society writ large and the quality of the people running the country at age 26 are far lesser than the historical analogs or the historical precedent.
Yeah, I mean, among the establishment conservative movement and the left, which I spend almost exclusively no time with, I think a lot of them are still pretty mediocre. In the way, like, the proof is in the pudding on this. Like, by and large, they're not married. They don't have kids. They don't really have skin in the game, and they went to the most elite universities. That's usually, and they are out getting hammered every night. Those are usually the tells for someone who's like not, maybe not the greatest Hill staffer, you've ever met. You can usually tell the ideological persuasion from that. But in terms of the people that come through our programming, it's a lot of very young, hungry guys. Like we had this guy in our summer fellowship this year, just ended a few weeks ago, and he went to Pepperdine and got married while he was at Pepperdine. Out in California.
Mm-hmm.
And this kid, hopefully this is not, he'll know who he is, so hopefully this doesn't embarrass him, but knows more about trade than anybody I've met in my life. And I don't even think that's what he studied at school. He was just like reading, Hamilton's report on manufacturers, like in his free time for fun. And that is
a very long, dry, not so great.
Well, I don't think Hamilton is necessarily a dry writer.
No, but the report in and of itself is.
Oh, sure,
yes.
Sure, yeah.
I've read it.
And
as someone with a touch of autism myself.
Yeah, yeah. We are really trying to find people like that. So let me think of some of the good tells for young people, and I think this applies for hiring in the private sector as well. So you're looking for someone who does extracurriculars like that. So, maybe they played sports, but also they read, Buchanan and Hamilton and stuff on the side. We're also always looking for people with skin in the game. So whether that's, they're married or they have kids or whatever, or I think another really great example is they're really passionate about a particular policy area because someone in their family or maybe their entire family was personally impacted in a negative way by either the establishment conservative position on that issue or the left-wing, vision for that issue. So we've had a lot of folks in our programming who come from blue-collar backgrounds, whose dads worked in manufacturing and then lost their jobs in the 90s after NAFTA. And that is a huge, guys will come to us and say, I want to do trade and manufacturing stuff because my dad lost his job and we spent X amount of years on unemployment and now he has this other job that he hates. And I just miss what it was like, when I was a kid.
And that's something fundamentally, and I've interacted with American Moment for years at this point. That's something fundamentally different about your guys' institution, your guys' effort to credential and place this next generation of conservative staffers, replace all those bad 26-year-olds with good 26-year-olds, is you don't care where they went to college.
Yeah.
And in fact, you guys are setting up, you've set up the institution, you've set up your programming to encourage non-college educated heartland people to take a massive leap of faith and come to Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Yeah, and investing a lot of money in them as well. Like each one, because we pay them, they get retirement benefits, a gym membership, and then $100 a month networking stipend. We give them credit cards to go get coffees with people, meet as many people as they can. And we're making, I mean, it's a lot of interviews and writing before we accept someone in as a fellow. We got to be really sure about what it is exactly we're doing here, because we're not a huge organization. We have 7 people on staff, and it's a major part of our budget to do this program. And so we got to be sure, that they're going to succeed. But I mean, the proof is in the pudding here. Like, we've got 8 fellows coming in next week for this fall. Out of those 8, I think 2 of them are community college grads. We've got 2 that didn't go to college at all. One of those 2 is currently working in a blue collar field. And I take those guys in. So we now do this program spring, summer, and fall. We do it 3 times a year. And I've seen a bunch of those guys come here and totally succeed. I was actually having a conversation with a friend. I just came from the State Department, had a meeting over there, and he was asking me about, he had some special assistant slots open over there, and asked me, like, what do you think is like the experience level, required to be a special assistant, not just here, but like anywhere. And there are some people who kind of have this belief, like, well, I would have liked you to have had some like Hill experience and stuff first. But we've sent a bunch of people we've trained a bunch of people, and then they get picked up, as special assistants. And like, you can be, 12 weeks out of college and go do that job, as long as you're willing to like, scrub the floors.
An alarm clock and a Metro card would suffice.
Yeah. Like, you can do that job if you're motivated for your principal and to serve the president and willing to not make a lot of money. Like, you can do that and excel for sure. And so I'm sort of, I dropped out of college myself, and it disappointed my parents. So not necessarily something I'm proud of, but I think, personally, I'm proof that you can drop out of school and like still have a successful, career in DC. I actually think one of the biggest things you have to train on for a lot of these kids coming out of colleges is just like how DC works, or having not gone to college at all. So a lot of the things we do early on in the fellowship is like, here's some recommendations about why you shouldn't wear that shirt with that tie. Like, let me tell you a little bit about that. Or, you did all this creative writing stuff, in your gen ed courses. Here's how dry government writing works. It's a lot of that stuff, but those things can be trained. The motivation, the passion for policy, those things cannot. And so if you pre-select for those things, everything else is teachable. And
you mentioned, a lot of these folks who come in from working class backgrounds were personally impacted. I've made this joke with my wife, who works in family policy before. It's the 2 types of people in family policy are, I came from a stable, giant Catholic family, or just giant family, period. Or my family was super effed up and I'm here to fix things.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 types of people who work in family policy. And there's kind of that divide all across. But beyond someone who has personal experience with the impact that misguided U.S. policy has had in their life, why is it good to have non-college educated working class people from the heartland come to DC and get involved in this movement? Because a lot of people on the right in particular kind of eschews the corrective potential, the potential for justice that can be found in Washington, D.C., in this town. It says, why are you bringing Joey, who's really smart and talented, to Washington, D.C. to do this politics thing when, like, I actually need Joey back at home starting a business, being involved in his church, and laying the groundwork for a revitalization of that community in particular. But there's still something just at its base of bringing these people to Washington, D.C. that you've identified and your organization has identified at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I learned this really early, probably, first 6 months after we started this organization. You go around and talk to all these staff on the Hill, and it was like they were not representative of the people back home, right?
Right.
And the thing that's, I think, really good, like I think the place we have had the most fellows from, like U.S. presidents, I believe, is Ohio. We have had the most from Ohio, and a lot of them were the now vice president's groupies.
Yeah.
They just like loved him, and really, really wanted to get into the fight here. But I think it's like natural, normal, and should be desired that the people that work here are like broadly representative of the people that vote for the guys that have to come here. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good thing. There's the whole, like, obviously we all know a lot of these Ivy League universities, a lot of the state schools are like indoctrination chambers, so you can short circuit that by picking people who by and large don't come from those places. Now, I will say we have had, actually, some of these places like Harvard and Yale have very strong now, like in the last year or two, have developed a very strong like college Republican chapter. And so we're starting to get more of those people, but the the broad-based people that come through our programming are like, they went to like, I've never had someone actually from this school, but this is the only example I can think of, like the University of Minnesota, M Crookston.
Yeah.
They're like doing that thing.
Yeah.
And going to one of these like outposts of the state schools, and maybe they did their generals at a community college and then just did the last 2 years, at a state school. Or like we've had guys, we had one guy in particular a few years ago who was, you might know who I'm talking about actually, who was a dental assistant in California and now like works in the White House. It's a lot of that, like people coming from other trades, other degrees, or maybe not having degrees at all, coming and doing this program, and getting their first job in politics, whether it's on the Hill, in the administration. We have a few former fellows that work here at the Heritage Foundation, and I think that's a great thing. I think we all want a capital city that's more representative of our friends and families back home.
So you mentioned some of the cases where these folks get activated. It's tragedy.
Yeah,
it's a desire to return things to the way they used to be when they were growing up, right? Some dignity in the work for their parents and their grandparents, but other motivating factors that gets these people into the fight. What has those been? Being
radicalized on the internet.
Yeah.
No, it's that's what a lot of the mainstream reporting says, but there is a little bit of truth to it. I think getting exposed, I don't think that the president's views on immigration, foreign policy, and trade are radical by any means.
If anything, they're radical in the traditional sense of the word. It's getting back to the root of things.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff, the way it starts, I was joking with some friends about this the other day because this is the way it happened for all of us. Like, you start like when you're in college, you're like listening to Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
Like
gateway drugs.
Yeah.
Everybody has one.
This is the hard stuff, man. Like, this is good. And then inevitably you become Catholic and start listening to Michael Knowles. And so then you're like a little further down, and then you graduate to after that it's either Steve Bannon or Tucker Carlson, and then you've really hit the hard stuff. Bannon's
in your ear talking about fourth generation warfare. You're like,
yeah, this is awesome. I'm gonna subscribe to the Financial Times. But it's a lot of that. Like I'm just trying to think anecdotally, going back through the people who come through the fellowship, through foundations, through AM Fridays, through any of our other programs, I think a lot of them actually started planning on going into different careers, and they were just like, I'm just going to be involved in college Republicans because, you know, I'm conservative, I vote Republican, this is like a good extracurricular for me. And then as they kind of go down this pipeline, it's like, oh my gosh, we have a lot at stake.
Yeah.
You know, I should
see they're eating the cats.
Yeah. Like usually by like junior or senior year, they're like, I got to do something, you know? And so aside from, you know, personal tragedy or, you know, having read all the right books or whatever, I've actually found that a lot of this is here's a freebie for anyone listening to this who is going to apply for the fellowship and get an interview with me. One of the things that I always ask is, what are you listening to? Like, what podcast do you listen to? You know, who do you have tweet notifications on for? Who, you know, if they came out with a book tomorrow, would you line up, you know, outside Barnes & Noble to pick it up? Like, who are those people? And that is you can always ask people about like policy questions, what their views are on certain things, and they can always lie to you. But the thing that's really revealing is who you choose to associate yourself with and who you look up to. And so I always find that, you know, to be a revealing question. And I think the reason a lot of people end up in the fight here and passionate about the issues that they care about is because of those people that they admire. Like a really good personal example for me, someone I still look up to all the time is, have you ever had Theo Wold on this thing?
No, because Theo's
busy, very busy.
He's very busy, and he's also like, I'm in DC, I'm not in DC, I'm in DC, I'm not in DC. Yeah, where's he at now? He's in the hinterland. So,
yeah,
you know, I called him yesterday, and we were talking, and he said, so are we doing the show or not? And I said, I'm always here. Like, you're the transient.
That's really funny because he and I, right before his flight left yesterday, we went to Alan Edmonds, and I just bought new dress shoes. He showed me what dress shoes to buy. But like, so my point in bringing him up is like, he is that for me. Like I really do, you know, sometimes and he's on our board at American Moment as well. Rachel Bovard is another great example of this, who's also on our board. Like sometimes I will go to them and I will say, you know, hey, I have this idea. I think we should do this thing. And they both say, that's dumb. You should not do that. And I'm like,
two types of people who will say that's dumb.
Yeah.
And my listeners know this because Rachel has been on the show before.
Yeah. And so I always, you know, we all have people we look up to. It doesn't matter, you know, if you're 8 years old or if you're 80. There's always someone that you admire and who influences the way that you view the world and what you want to do with your life. And so that, sorry to get off on a tangent about this, but like that is a very revealing thing throughout the interview processes, who that person is for these people.
Well, and
right?
it's good, and it's no, I think it's a good tangent to go on because they're not slaves of the moment, right? Mm-hmm. This is not a group of people who have been so energized by Trump himself that they're just going to leave as soon as he's gone.
Yeah.
President Trump played a huge role in all of their political formations, undoubtedly. But those hoping, the enemies of the movement right now, hoping that this is going to be a flash in the pan, and those enemies are on the left and on the right, are going to be very sorry when the good 26-year-olds are running the government as 30-year-olds and 34-year-olds
totally agree.
and 38-year-olds.
This is actually some very deep American moment lore. The first public thing we ever did that Sarab and Jake, my co-founders at American Moment, and I all did together before we launched American Moment. Do you remember this? Do you know what I'm about to say?
I don't know what you're about
So
to say.
we after the election was certified in 20, Sarab had written up this whole statement. It was maybe 500 or 600 words. And the title of it was, "We Will Not Go Back." And basically what the statement said was, you know, despite the way things have gone, this is not over. You are not getting President Mike Pence in 2024. That is so beyond, you guys don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
You know? And so we signed it, all three of us, and just put it out on Twitter. And we had, you could like sign it.
I remember this. You guys you racked it up.
It was like first name, last name, email. And we actually had, it was funny, at the bottom, the color scheme and the logo were totally different than what we ended up going with.
The shield.
It was the shield. It was the little red and blue shield at the bottom. But I thought we were going to have like maybe 100 people sign it. And, it would be like some of our cool buddies, that sort of thing. We had, I think it was 6,000 people sign it in 48 hours. And many of those people went on to become, American Moment Fellows or people that we brought here and placed in their first job. And that is actually, I think we met at least 2 of our employees, our future employees, through putting that statement out. So there really is, a lot of excitement about this. And I don't think there's any sense in which we like go back to like John McCain, George W. Bush. Neoconservatism is dead.
Yeah. A difference in how you need to train people for legislative activity and executive activity.
Yeah.
And of course, coming off of 2020, the plan is get people into the executive branch. But your holding chamber or your incubation chamber is the legislative branch. It's nonprofit organizations. Explain to our viewers at home who don't live in this town, by the grace of God, that jump, right? And the surge.
How you jump from the Hill to the executive branch?
If you jump from the Hill to the executive branch, nonprofits to the executive branch, the surge of people that come into Washington, D.C. when there is a change in power. How many people you have to place in an administration?
Yeah, so I mean, I think American Moment is a really good example. So we had 7 people on January 19th, and then on January 20th, we went down to 2 full-time and 1 part-time. And that is
for staff.
For our staff. Like our internal staff that is managing, all this identifying, educating, credentialing. And that is pretty much across the whole, actually based, nonprofit ecosystem. I doubt this is happening at AEI, right? But here, I know it's the case at, CPI, CRA, America First Legal, all of these organizations have incubated a lot of very desirable talent. And so a lot of them get picked up to go into the administration. And the same thing happens on the Hill, although on the Hill, it's much larger scale, right? Because there's thousands of Republican staff on the Hill. And so the Hill we actually spent a lot of time in the first 2 or 3 months, making personnel recommendations, to our friends in the administration, but also an equivalent amount on the Hill because they were losing all their good people. And the thing that was actually really good about that is I think it allowed for a lot of quicker accelerations of careers than would have otherwise happened. So there were a fair few, LCs, legislative correspondents in our, I suppose I should probably actually explain how one of these offices works. So you have staff assistants, which are on very bottom. They answer the phones. They do, Capitol tours, that sort of thing. You have legislative correspondents who also do a lot of that stuff, but then they also write form letters back to constituents, handle constituent issues, that sort of thing. And then you get up into, and usually they're segmented into particular policy areas depending on the office. And then those people graduate up into LAs, legislative assistants, who now were actually getting into doing policy stuff. And then you have the legislative director and you have the comms team and all of that. And those kind of vary and by office. And then you have the chief of staff. And so we had a lot of people who were like staff assistants or LCs who had been doing that for 5 or 6 months, who got promoted up into being LAs. And normally that is like if you start as a staff assistant, that is a couple year process.
It's 2 to 3 years, and on Capitol Hill, that's an eternity.
Yeah.
And that's what some people that who don't live in Washington, D.C., who aren't involved in the political industry, don't understand.
Yeah.
Where if you're stuck in the same job for 4 or 5 years and you're in a congressional office, that's a long time to be there.
Yeah.
Whereas in corporate America, that's nothing.
Right.
It's like you're not even fully vested. What are you talking about?
Yeah. No, 100%. So yeah, there was a lot of like rapid career acceleration happening there, which I think is selfishly is a very good thing, because I think the people that we're bringing in are uniquely capable and uniquely hardworking, to be able to step into doing some of those jobs. And sure, there's a learning curve, right? Going from, being an LC for 6 months to like suddenly being in LA. But again, these are the guys that are like reading the report on manufacturers under the bed sheets with a flashlight. So, they're I think uniquely equipped to handle it.
It's such a good point that you make about rapid career movement upward, right? And the space that an administration provides for that. Because if you are an employer in politics, right, if you are a Republican member who needs more staffers, if you are a President Trump coming in for another 4-year term and you need to hire thousands of people, having those personnel pipelines in place and knowing that I can call up Nick Solheim, or I can go to an established bank of well-qualified, aligned people, well, that encourages dynamism across the movement. It encourages mobility across the movement. That, I think, has played out in the first 7 months of this administration. Stephen Miller, of course, is the architect of a lot of this, which is just moving so quickly at such a rapid pace, where, a traditional stint in the administration can be 12 to 18 months, but now we're seeing, a crop of people leave after the first 6 because it's just been
they're working 20 hours a day.
They've just been so dynamic.
Yeah.
And that, I think, has been a boon to the conservative movement, where in corporate America, if you're thinking about rapid amounts of turnover, that's not good.
Yeah.
In politics, it's something different.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, on the Stephen Miller point, this is something that I don't think I've ever said this publicly, but like basically our goal is to create 10,000 Stephen Millers. That's the selling point. Like people forget that, Stephen started as a junior staffer for then Senator Jeff Sessions, and was in that office for a number of years, was very loyal to the senator. And he is, the way that he has progressed his career is not because, he sucked up to the right people or he shook the right hands or whatever. It's because he works his ass off. It's because he works his ass off and he knows what he's talking about. So that's the goal, man.
Yeah.
Create 10,000 of that guy. In fact, we have I usually get this question from at least.
And if they spend 7 months doing a thing,
yeah,
and then go do another thing where they can relax a little bit, get paid a little better, and then come back, that's okay, right? You're still working in the political apparatus. Like,
right.
God bless the guys at Palantir. I don't want Palantir to come in and steal all these 10,000 Stephen Millers after they've been trained and they move to the hinterlands or whatever. But I don't think that it's a problem where you have these really short dynamic stints and then you go back.
Yeah.
It actually mirrors, and we talked about this when 26-year-olds have always kind of run the country.
Yeah.
It mirrors the type of political careers that you would see in the founding era, where someone would be a member of the Senate for a very short and dynamic period of time and then pulled back by the state government and then run for the House of Representatives and do that for a term or two, but then go have a state position, right? Like it's a... not just by it, and that wasn't just because of the structure of elections. That was because they were working within a coalition in their given state or in their given political party at the time to handle problems of a new republic as they arose. It's like, we just need to surge the best talent there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, well, and I think, the other piece here is that the left has done a really good job of like rapidly credentialing a lot of their own people and then giving them these sort of like sinecures, just holding off on the sidelines, ready to step in. So I don't know this for a fact, but like my guess is, a lot of these people in organizations on the other side have at least probably 2 to 4 names for every single politically appointed position within an administration. And they're always ready. I know where that guy is. I know everything about him. We're getting him in. Like that's the deal.
Yeah. Think tanks. It's beyond just think tanks. Think tanks is a good way to think about it. It is literally a tank of people with these aligned ideas.
And a lot of these positions are like, this is one thing that I think I underrated pretty early on. Like a lot of these positions are like highly, highly specialized. Like you need to know an insane, amount of information about this like one tiny thing. And they have like 2 to 4 names for all of it. And one of the things that, and I think there's a mixed experience. Like some people are leaving after 6 months, but I also talked to a bunch of people who are like, I'm doing all 4 years. I'm in. I don't care about the money. Like, doesn't matter. I'm going to serve the president all 4 years. So there's I think a pretty good mix of both. But to the extent
and I might have overstated the case. They're not abandoning ship. They've known that they've signed on for a 4-year project, and they are committed to that.
Yeah. And but those people coming out, early, and sometimes, their whole plan was, I'm going to go in for 6 months and I'm going to set up this policy process really well. And then we've got this guy waiting in the wings that we're going to bring in who's never done this job before. And it enables us to credential 2 people at once to be able to do that job, right? So in the next, conservative administration, it's like, cool, we have at least like 2 names for 2 guys that could do that job. And then here's 2 or 3 other people waiting in the wings who are like, that are ready to probably be able to do that job. And so that's something that I think, the conservative movement is learning and actually executing on really well right now, is starting to rapidly credential a lot of these people for a very broad base of roles, I guess not just in the administration, but also on the Hill.
Yeah, that was the genius of the left, and we learned so much about it with the fight against USAID, right?
Yeah.
And just how much of this money was going to, like, everyone's like, it wasn't propping up the left, it was propping up a nonprofit organization that's committed to seeing democracy thrive here and all around the world. And it's like, no, we know that. Like, we see
we know what it is.
We have LinkedIn. We have LinkedIn. We can look up and see that this person worked on the Hillary Clinton campaign, and you are just waiting for her. You're paying her 6 figures a year, waiting for her to come in at some junior level or mid-level at the State Department and bring transgenderism to the Taliban in Afghanistan. Like, we know what this is.
Do you remember that I think he was an energy official, that bald guy from the Biden administration who stole that African woman's
It was like MASH.
clothing?
It was like corporate clinger who always dresses in drag and says, I'm crazy.
Yeah. So
the nuclear waste person.
So that guy, bunch of Fox News headlines about it. I think the lady whose clothes he stole went on Tucker Carlson, right, with her husband, to talk about like, why is this guy stealing my bespoke clothing?
We shouldn't have a kleptomaniac in charge of nuclear waste.
But I think the thing that's really important there is that guy got hired by some nonprofit and got paid $600,000 a year within 2 weeks of that whole controversy. The left takes care of their own very well. They've built a very good revolving door. And I'm not saying we should do it for like weird people who are like stealing, like cross-dressing and stealing women's clothes, but like our guys who, have done, good, faithful service, to the president, we should have a place for them to go and be prepared to pull them back in the moment we need them. Mm-hmm. And so like my whole thought process around this is like, why don't we have our own revolving door? We should do that.
It's a team sport.
Yeah.
And
it's 100% a team sport.
You never know when your number's going to get called.
Like, I don't know if you're cool with cussing on this podcast or not, but I'm going to do it anyway. Like, I ain't shit, you know? Like, the everything that we've been able to build at, you know, American Moment and all the, you know, people that we've been able to help, that's come from, like, great friends and people that were willing to pour into us from day one, since before we were anybody. You know, Theo and Rachel are both very good examples of that. Ryan Grodusky is another. You know, these were people who were willing to jump on day one and invest into us, and they've, you know, given us so many connections and insight and advice, like all things that I can never pay back. And that is the way this is supposed to work. Conservatives are the ones that care about family, about relationships, about loving our neighbor. And so, like, it actually makes much more sense for us to have this sort of revolving door where we take care of our own people.
Yeah. And since you're hesitating to name drop throughout the episode, I'm going to say, and the vice president as well.
Yeah.
Before he was running for even Senate in Ohio.
Yeah.
Was a believer.
First American Moment board member.
First American Moment board member. He was a believer in the project. And but again, now he gets to reap the rewards of it, which is exciting to see.
But again, that had nothing to do with us and who we were. Again, how old was I? The first time we met him, I was 23. You know, Sarab was a year younger than me, so he was 22. And I think Jake, I don't even think by the time
Jake was like 12.
I had this conversation with him. I was up in New York the other day, and he said that at our launch party he couldn't drink because he was still 20. So like,
I remember this.
It had nothing to do with us and like how great we were. It was that, you know, we as a movement have a lot of these, and a lot of them are like, you know, millennials. A lot of these guys and gals that are really willing to pour into people who, you know, yeah, we were nobody, but we had a pretty good idea, you know? And so, I think this is the thing that I always try to remind myself as we're running 4 academic programs at once. We have programming 45 out of 52 Fridays a year. And the thing that I'm always trying to remind myself is like, at the very least, the best way I can pay back this sort of investment in trust and in time and advice that people have given to us is to pass that on to the people coming through our programming. And so I think, you know, creating that sort of ecosystem where we're all going to take care of each other and have each other's back is a very important part of this process.
And let's talk about the team sport. This coalition that Trump assembled in the last election is nothing short of remarkable. We've talked about it ad nauseum on this show because it's just not something anyone could have ever envisioned, and it sure as hell wasn't going to happen if the Republican Party followed the plan that it laid out in the postmortem of the 2012 election, where we need to get soft on a whole bunch of issues. We need to become the left to win elections against the left. Oh, that's really going to work out for us. But the coalition, let's draw the circle a little bit smaller. This coalition on the right with 18 to 30-year-olds, the people that you are training, interacting with on a day-to-day basis.
I'm about to fall out of that age category, by the way.
I'm not far behind you, brother. Yeah. But this smaller subsection of the right is bold, daring, aggressive, wants to win, and they will not get tired of winning. But they are wildly divided on certain aspects of their worldview, whether they are more traditionally conservative, or they are post-liberal Catholic, or they are post-liberal techno-right, post-liberal. I don't even know. You know, all the characterizations of BAP have been pretty terrible, but I'll just say, you know, post-liberal BAP types versus post-liberal techno-optimists versus post-liberal Catholic conservatives versus the traditional conservatives versus the just kind of uber entrenched in MAGA world people. I mean, these are all parts of the pie that could be pulling away from each other. The slices could be taken off and put on a separate plate if it's not managed properly. What are those? How would you explain the different camps? What are the forces keeping them together, and what are the forces that could pull them apart?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you've done a pretty good job, talking about the different factions there and sort of what their ideological worldview is. I think there are a few things that I would say. One would be that I think it's way too early to start pulling at those loose strings, right? Like, all of this is actually relatively new and has specifically gotten a lot stronger in the last 5 years. I mean, you look at like neoconservatism, it took much longer for that to fall out of favor. So I think the first thing I would say is to talk about how this coalition could break up. It's way too premature for that. I think that generally speaking, with some caveats, the big difference between a lot of those coalitions is not necessarily outcome, but motivation. Like, why? Why do you, feel this way about this particular, issue, which I think is fine. As long as the policy outcomes are aligned, we can be co-belligerents, on those issues. I mean, even all the way down to the micro, Catholics versus Protestants, right? Like, we're going to be aligned on 99% of policy outcomes. If we want to fight over the 1% when we've won on everything else, fine. But really what we want to do is we want to win on 99% of those issues. And then to the extent that there is some difference in, policy outcomes. So I think like the H-1B visa program is a good example. I think everyone should learn, and I say this, frequently to a lot of our young people, to have a little grace for one another. I think not having a big tent is good when it comes to people who disagree on the majority of the policy outcomes. I do not think that we should be having, Dick Cheney lovers, there's basically nothing in that worldview that has anything in common with me. So I feel pretty good about that being, outside of the tent. But I think people need to learn to have a little more grace with one another on, the example that I always give, we have this list of 10 priorities on our website. And when fellows start to get into a heated, disagreement about something, I'm like, I'm going to remind you that you agree on 9 of the 10 things, out of our priorities here. And actually you guys don't disagree with this priority. You just disagree with this one little niche policy outcome. I'm going to give you some advice. Get over it. Mm-hmm. There's no need to kick this guy out of the tent. Now there's always, a bit of shaving that happens, after you win a big victory or suffer, a big loss. That sort of thing is always going to happen. But I think there are a lot of people in this administration who have brought a lot of factions together. There's a very good speech. I would encourage a lot of people to listen to it, that the vice president made at the American Dynamism Summit. I think it was February of this year or something ago.
Yeah, I was on pool with him.
And gave a very good speech on how, very conservative Christians and, a lot of the tech people who may not necessarily hold the same views or motivations on these things can work together on the core set of issues that we agree on. And I think a lot of the members of the cabinet actually have, sort of a foot in each world, or at the very least have good relationships with people in both. So the overarching thing that I would say is it's way too early for something like this to break apart, and everybody just needs to learn to not be a jerk and just have a little bit of grace for one another.
One of my mentors, Harmeet Dillon, when I was in college, she told me, young conservatives or young politicos are like baby snakes. And what she meant by that is kind of an old wives' tale, that baby snakes, when they bite you, they inject, if they're venomous, they inject way too much venom because they haven't learned how to control how much venom is going to kill something.
That's very wise advice.
And she said, and that's how young politicos operate. Like you see, silly little stories coming out of your college newspaper about how this one college elected to student government person, his life and his on campus has been destroyed because a group of mean people or of mean girls have decided that they're going to come down like a ton of bricks on this other student body representative. And it's like, gosh, you don't realize like this is going to be on Google for forever, but no one actually cares. Nobody cares.
Well, and this is sort of like a central thesis of us being conservatives is we're not Bolsheviks. Like I'm not going to exile you to Mexico and then kill you later. That's like that's not what we do. We take care of our own people. Now, again, like you're always going to want to monitor your flanks, right? Like there are going to be people who they're going to start falling into, they only agree with you on 2 or 3 out of the 10 things. And then, okay, yes, we should have a serious conversation about that. But we can't blow any of these like interpersonal things way too far out of proportion.
You said earlier you ain't bleep. I disagree because I think you've lived one of the most interesting lives of any of my friends.
Super boring.
You were born and raised where?
So it's even more complicated than that. I was born in my dad enlisted in the Marine Corps at 17. And so I was born while he was stationed at Camp Pendleton. So lived in California. I don't remember it at all. So I was only there for like 1.5 years or 2 years. And then we moved back to Minnesota. I lived in Minnesota for about 10 years. Then my parents became missionaries to Honduras when I was 10.
Okay.
So lived in Honduras for 8 years.
Yeah, lived in Honduras for 8 years. And what did you do while you were in Honduras?
A lot of things, but if you're referring to my job,
you know what I want to say.
On a day-to-day basis, I worked on a hog farm, for 6 years, and then the last few years I was there, we worked at this school in Honduras that had they had installed like a hydroelectric dam in the 70s that was like very out of shape by the time we had gotten there. And so those last 2 years I had the privilege, and I don't tell him enough, but had the privilege of getting to work with my dad every day doing hydroelectric engineering, which is a lot of fun.
This is for folks at home who understand the different types of Spanish speakers in the United States and the adjacent areas. It's a funny joke, a joke amongst our friends who interact with Spanish speakers on a regular basis, whether they're Filipino or whether they're from California, is that Nick is fluent in a bunch of different languages. One of those is Spanish, but he has this grovelly hog farm from Honduras Spanish accent, which is fantastic.
I did not learn the proper way.
Learned shoveling poop of hogs with a bunch of dudes in Honduras.
It was great. Still the best job I've ever had. But you end up shoveling a lot of excrement here too. So
right. It's not much different.
Yeah, prepared me very well.
But you returned to the snow eventually. You said you spent 10 years in Minnesota. You're not a Latin America expert. In fact, your kind of venture into expertise is Nordic.
Yeah, a lot colder. Yeah, I moved back to the States in 15. I think it was like a few weeks before the president announced that he was going to run. So I went to this small Christian school in Minnesota for like 1.5 years. Dropped out right after the president got elected. But one of the ways that I made money was I ended up being through a series of convoluted events, being a camping road trip tour guide in Iceland. So I would do that specifically in like winter breaks. So like Thanksgiving break, winter break, spring break sometimes, because being from Minnesota, I could handle the cold. And I used to drink a lot at this pub in Reykjavik called the Drunk Rabbit. It's an Irish pub in Reykjavik, and it's run by all these Irish guys who like don't speak a lick of Icelandic. And it turned out that I just went there because I liked it, and I drank a lot of Irish car bombs, and nobody ever beat me up for asking for one. But anyway, it was the watering hole for the Icelandic Parliament, and a lot of the ambassadors in country as well. So ended up having a lot of very interesting conversations there. At the time, the Chinese were agitating for a deep sea port in eastern Iceland, and so came back, and I was like, wow, I'm gonna like read everything ever written, from an American perspective about the Arctic, which is really like 25 books. It's like not actually that much, sort of became an under-credentialed expert on it, and ended up actually shortly before I met Saurabh, my co-founder, and my wife the same night. But about maybe like 6 months prior, I started this organization called the Wallace Institute for Arctic Security. And basically what I was doing was I was advocating for, an increased American presence and investment in the Arctic, and led to a lot of really cool experiences. Like during COVID, I ended up co-hosting a briefing with then House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Engel, who was a Democrat. And it was the first briefing they had hosted on the Arctic in like 35 years. Like just nobody talked about it. Ended up writing a lot of memos for people about the buying Greenland, in quotation marks, question. So yeah, and I went to Greenland about 2 months ago. I wrote an article about it in the American Conservative. It was great. Really great experience. But yeah, been moonlighting as the Right's Arctic expert for the last couple of years.
So this is what I want to get to is nobody talked about it, and now all of a sudden it's crucially important.
I know, I picked a really good time.
You did pick a really good time to get into this. If you picked this 40 years ago, you would have had a very lonely existence.
Yeah.
But now with the technological and energy demands of the golden age and this upcoming or partially already here age of artificial intelligence, it's very important. The Chinese know this. The Americans know this, and there is a hot contestation. Hot is the wrong word because that seems like it's kinetic warfare. But there is a growing contest over control of or influence in the Arctic. Why is the Arctic so important?
Yeah, there are so many reasons, but I think one of the really interesting things that people don't know a lot about. So we know that, like during the Alaska purchase, we do the Alaska purchase, and then, as soon as we start making automobiles and like using oil and gasoline, it's like, oh, there's a lot of that up here. That's great. There's actually this great report written. We'd explored buying both Greenland and Iceland immediately after the Alaska purchase. There's this great report you can find in the State Department archives online. It's called a report on the resources of Greenland and Iceland. And the thing they were really concerned with was cryolite, which you use to make aluminum. So there are a lot of the Arctic is a very natural resource rich place. And I feel like a lot of people know that. So that's, I won't go too deep into it, but that's one thing. I think the thing that a lot of people don't know about is, the implications of shipping. So there are sort of two Arctic shipping routes. There is the infamous Northwest Passage, which, European explorers spent a lot of time trying to find. And then there is the NSR, the Northern Sea Route, which is its equivalent over Russia. And, we've seen in the data, more polar ice melt over the years, which, I believe is a natural phenomenon. But that has meant that it is much easier to send shipping through there without an ice-breaking escort, right? So traditionally, if you were to sail like just a normal steel ship through a bunch of ice. I mean, we all know, we've all seen the Titanic, right? Like we know how that goes. That's bad. And so, what you used to have to do is you would have to send, these ships with icebreakers to break up the ice. And then a lot of these commercial ships would follow in the trail. But what people don't know about is that, the Chinese are currently, they've done it a few times already this year. They've been sending container ships through the Northwest Passage, which has many advantages. One of which is it cuts transit time to like Western Europe, or if you're sending it, that way to North America, in half. It saves you millions of dollars per voyage to do something like that. But the other thing is it avoids all the U.S. choke points. The Straits of Malacca, the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, places where, we have military bases, we're frequently, conducting training exercises. It misses all of those. So there's obvious concern, that we've sort of driven the Russians and the Chinese together, and they're doing this now. But there is also equivalent opportunity on the American side. We are currently locked in a decades-long and currently dormant dispute with the Canadians over whether or not the Northwest Passage constitutes internal or international waters as according to the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. But if we were able to resolve that in our favor, we could do the same thing. And it cuts actually more time. It cuts about 50% of the time off, if you're shipping from the West Coast to say Western Europe, as opposed to the Panama Canal. So that is like one interesting example of like something really big that's happening that it seems like not a lot of people know about.
So using some tariffs potentially as leverage to make that happen might not be the worst idea in the world.
Some people might say.
Some people might say that.
Some people might say that.
As we kind of move into a midterm year, I know it's crazy to say that, where it feels like we just started this whole thing all over again. But as we move into a midterm year, there is going to be a lot of questions asked about the aggressiveness of the administration so far. And you can already see this from members on Capitol Hill. Chill out, guys. I have an election to win. And if I don't win this election, you're not going to have me around to give you the thumbs up on your legislative priorities. Much less that they only passed one big, beautiful bill. Yeah. And the other ones are
and they're not confirming quickly enough most of the president's appointees.
But, of course, yeah, all of these all of these problems that we have with Congress as it's currently constituted, there's going to be calls for the administration to slow down. What should the administration's response be? What should the response be from these 26-year-olds all across government making the fact sheets?
I mean, look, I'll add this caveat on the front end. I'm not in the business of politics. I don't do campaign stuff. I don't do any of that. I don't do polling. None of that is my area of expertise. But, the thing that I would remind any members who may be saying something like that, who are the only two people who got elected nationally based on what they were promising to do that they are now doing? Maybe you should take a cue from those guys.
Nick Solheim, thank you for coming on the Signal City.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sit Down. Before you go, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review. We not only love your feedback, but it really does help the show. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works. See you next time.